we're live.
Oh my goodness.
Yay! This is so wonderful. For those of you watching now, you may hopefully have already listened to some of the episodes or all of the episodes. I know a lot of you have been really following along, which is was absolutely our intention, was to make it a bit of a series for you to get gripped on. And we've had some wonderful feedback from the Heads Together podcast listeners of this series. So, for those of you who, I can't believe any of you don't know who Alicia is, but for those who don't, Alicia, welcome. Can you just introduce yourself to everyone watching and, yeah, just a
Yeah,
little bit of the background of how we met, perhaps, would be good.
yeah. So first, thanks, Jill, for doing this. A while back, just so everybody, a little backstory. A while back, well, we met last like a year and a half ago or more, something like
Must
that.
be. Yeah,
I know.
possibly more.
I think it might have been more. And then we did a retreat here in the Algarve. And one of the things I have followed Jill's podcast for a while, and really, you are like an amazing interviewer. You're really, really good. And so
Thank
when
you.
I was, why we started this was I am publishing a book called The Shaman's Wife, a mystical journey of surrender and self discovery. It publishes on September 10, which is like, oh my God, 6 days from here. And it's on Amazon and all those places. And as part of the promotion, one of the things I thought of was people were like really interested in what was the backstory, what was going on, what are some of the shamanic principles and concepts. And so I called Jill and I said, you know how good you are as an interviewer? Would you
Oh,
consider
she knew
doing it?
she knew exactly how to reel me in. Honestly, flattery will get you everywhere with me.
And I said, would you consider doing like several episodes with me with different topics about, things that are in the book and just life in general? So it's although it's about the book, everything in the series that we did really applies to so many different things in our lives or in our work. And that is how we ended up with the 7 episodes and then today live with everyone. And it's been really marvelous because I have to admit, I had no idea at any given episode what we were going to talk about. It just flowed so well and we had such great
Which we
conversations.
didn't. Yeah, and we made it that way intentionally, actually, didn't we?
We didn't want a
Because
script.
I'm not keen on scripted. Yeah, exactly. We didn't want to, like, really decide in advance every single segment that we were going to cover. And I think it was all the richer for it. It meant that every episode, just the
Was real.
conversation meandered, but in a good way. Yeah, absolutely. It unfolded really nicely.
Right.
Also, do you know what, Alicia? I just want to thank you because we kind of got moving on this project quite quickly, didn't we? We said, right, this is
Yeah.
what we're going to do. Okay, we recorded and we were quite organized. And you are an incredibly creative person. You're an author. You know, I know how creative you are, but you are also very organized and I know you're reliable. Yeah, you know,
Oh.
and I think that's such a really great combination because I feel like sometimes people who are supremely creative like you are, they will struggle with like an order of play and a plan. Whereas, you know, obviously I'm like a flipping organizational. I was going to say a really bad word then. I remembered lies, pulled it back quite nicely there. But yeah, I love a spreadsheet, and you
Yes,
absolutely
you do.
pandered to my need.
You
Yes, I
certainly
love
do
a
love
spreadsheet.
spreadsheets.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it was easy. Like, I mean,
Yes.
when you run a business, you even if you're creative, you run a business and you want to be effective, you have to be organized. And I'm not quite to that
Right.
extent. Like, I don't do spreadsheets. I do maybe Word documents, but that's it. But like, no, it really helped that we were very much in sync and we had a goal and we knew what we were doing and we had a night like I want to say a plan, but it wasn't quite a plan. It was like a guideline that we used.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
within that, there's a lot of, original, creative thinking about what was going to go on, and then really organic conversations.
Definitely, absolutely. It was really lovely way to do it. Actually, I really did enjoy it. Tell us, so for those of us who have been following along, I've been promising that on this live, I will get to ask you some of the things that maybe I didn't get to ask you in the pre-recorded episodes, and obviously you're live and can't escape. So
There's
this is a
nowhere to
really
go.
excellent opportunity. I've also had a couple of audience members from Head Steer the podcast have said a shout out on there, and a couple of people emailed me, so we'll definitely get to those as well. But I just want to take you back a little bit to when you were first feeling called to write the book. And I know that that didn't happen straight away, so it's almost like you felt called to write the book, but it wasn't actually the right time for this book to be birthed right then. Can you just speak a little bit to that? Because
Hmm.
I find that quite interesting that you were intuitive enough to know this isn't the time.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember exactly where it was. I was in Quito, and it was 2015. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember being in the living room in our apartment in Quito, and I started to write it. And then I wrote a couple of chapters. And then I was doing a memoir course. And while I was in Quito, I remember thinking, maybe because the memoir course also like gave me a little more context, but I kind of
Yeah.
knew, like, I know that there's a story here, but I don't think the story is complete. It's not ready to be written.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew that I wasn't the writer who would write that story. I just wasn't. I wasn't I didn't have the craft and the technique behind me to
Mm.
write the book that wanted to be written. And so that was in 2015. And then I would write like a chapter, or I wouldn't even call it chapters. It was more like an experience or a scene that I was thinking, oh, someday I'll put this into a book. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until 2019 where I picked it up again. And at that point, most of the story had actually, or a lot of the story had actually occurred. I had also gotten to be a much better writer, and I hired a writing mentor. And when she read the first couple of chapters, she said to me, you're a good writer, but you're not in it. And I was like, yeah, I'm in it because it's my
Ooh.
story. And
Ooh.
she's like, no, she
Yeah.
says, you're emotionally distant. She says, I feel like you're telling me, but like it's happening to someone else. And I knew she was right, because some of what was going on in the story was really difficult emotionally for me. And then she
Mm.
said to me, is there a moment in time where you thought, oh my God, what have I done? And I said, I know exactly what that moment was. It was completely right there in front of me.
Right.
There was no escaping it. And she said, write that and send it to me. And so I wrote it and I sent it to her, and she read it and she said, this is chapter 1. And I was like, it is? And that became Dancing Between the Worlds, which is chapter 1. Because for some reason I thought, well, I should start doing this chronologically. But what she taught me to do is she taught me to go dance through time. So, one of the things that's really difficult about writing any kind of like novel or memoir is the ability to transition between the present moment, the future moment, and the past moment, and do those transitions in a way that you don't lose the reader. And I
And
became
you
practiced
are
at it.
masterful at that.
I finally,
Yeah,
I
and
went to
you know
really
what?
work at it.
But before you even have said that to me before, because I've heard you say that before, that was something you had to work on. But before you even mentioned that, I remember you were so generous, and you shared with me a chapter of the book quite early on
I
in the
did.
early
Yeah.
days of the writing process for you. And I remember thinking, this is really skillful, because there was this element of going backward and then coming back into the present. And I remember thinking then, this is really skillful writing.
I know.
I
I
know
thought,
that is not something I would be able to do.
it,
And I remember being really impressed with that,
yeah,
how it
thank you
took
for
me
that.
with you.
And I didn't lose people. That was the thing. It's like I don't want to lose
No,
someone. Like where am I in time? Are we in the present? Are we in the future?
right.
In the past? So a lot of credit goes to just my writing mentor, but also I did do some courses that helped me understand how to do it. And a huge piece of it was I think my brain works like that. So it was easy for me to start doing this and say, I remember this from the past and then bring it back and like kind of close that circle. Although I wouldn't say I remember, it was just
Mm,
different kinds of ways of transitioning. So that was what part of like not only writing the story, but becoming a better writer as I'm writing the story. And I wonder,
mm.
for other authors and for other writers, if that happens for them as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think actually for anyone watching or listening to this, that is a comfort. That's a real comfort to know that you can start from a place of not feeling ready and letting that be okay.
Yeah.
Letting it be okay that now is not the right time and trusting that you'll know when it is right, just like you did. You
Yeah,
knew
I
when it
did.
was
And I
right
did know when it
and you
was
rose to the
right.
occasion.
Yeah. But also like if
Mm,
that happens, also don't stop. Like what I did was and a lot of what was in the book, I actually wrote in my journal. So the reason I can recall so much of it in such detail was because I was always journaling. So a lot of these events, I could go back to my journal and say, okay, this was happening. This is what it felt like. This is what was going on. And then
yeah.
reworking that from like a journal entry into like a scene in the memoir. So you don't stop writing. You just don't have that pressure on yourself that, "Oh, I got to get this done. I got to get this done." You just, you have these little pieces that eventually when you realize that you're ready, then it becomes like a jigsaw puzzle. How do I put all these
Yeah,
pieces
right.
together in a way
Right.
that makes sense?
And I've heard this before that, it's actually very rare that an author's process is to sit down and start with chapter one and then write the book through to the end. That's kind of just not how it is. So that's obviously was really true for you. It's another really good reason not to throw your old journals away, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
there is gold in those old notes. I'll share something with you actually that's quite funny. I tried doing Julia Cameron's morning pages for a while.
uh-huh,
But
uh-huh,
I actually stopped doing morning pages because I found I was writing so much that I just knew that in the future, when I come back and I want to pull from those journals and notebooks, there's just going to be almost too much in there. It was too much of a stream of consciousness. And I suddenly thought, no, I'm going to go back to actually writing a bit more intentionally in my journal because that's going to be more useful for me. And I think part of that was from what you'd said, that process of finding all the gold that was in those journals. Just
and
amazing.
the other thing that was surprising is, I different people write differently, but I did have like an outline, if you will. But I moved a lot of chapters. Oh, this one became this
Yeah.
chapter.
Yeah.
But like,
Right.
I honestly did not know how the book was going to end. I just kept, I was like, the book
I love
started
that.
writing
Which
itself.
for a memoir, I feel like yeah, yes. So it gained a momentum of its own. I
It
just think
did.
it's ironic a memoir and not knowing how it's going
I,
to end. It's
I
quite
know
like
it sounds silly, right?
if
And
you
I thought,
think
oh,
about it, it's like whoa.
it's going to end when I'm in Portugal, right? But like, that's not what happened. And I started, and so the advice I have is trust the process, because there's a part of
Yeah.
you that knows, like, just keep going and don't be don't be so rigid that it has to be a certain way. So you'll move chapters around and you'll remember things, and then you'll delete things. You'll say, well, okay, well, this doesn't look like it belongs anymore. And so you start doing all of this stuff. And then, like what I said recently to someone is, I thought I knew what it was about. And then I didn't actually really know the real reason, I guess, for the memoir until I wrote the very last line. And when I remember distinctly,
that gives me goosebumps.
Putting the period, like the sentence period, and I went, oh my God, that's what it was about. It was like one of those revelations that it was like, and now people do not go to the last page and read that first. Don't do that.
No, that's cheating.
It's cheating.
Not do that.
Don't do that. But when I did it, I was like, oh my God, that was the underlying theme through everything. And it shows up in different ways. And so there are different themes that run through the whole memoir, but there is an overarching theme. And that's the one that, like, when I wrote the last line, it was like, yes, now I get it. Now I know why I had to write this book.
And you did have to write it, didn't you?
I did have to write it. Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I did. I had started it, but with the intention being very different when I started it, and then I set it aside because I just intuitively knew. But like at the end of it, when I got really into writing it, I had doubts, and I thought, well, who's going to want to read this, and why does it matter? But I was just so pulled by it. I had to keep going. And then, one of the things that I did is I serialized the chapters. Remember, every Saturday, my list would get one chapter, and I had so much feedback.
I can still remember. Honestly, I can still remember sitting in bed every Saturday morning. It became my ritual with my cup
So many
of tea.
people said that,
and I don't think. And there aren't that many things that I kind of make a ritual or kind of am waiting to drop into my inbox, right? That's the goal for anyone who's watching this. The goal for us when we create any kind of content or anything we're putting out into the world, our goal should be to have just anyone to be sitting there and saying, I've been waiting for this.
It was great.
And that's absolutely what you did when you serialized the book. I think that was such a genius idea.
Yeah, and the feedback that I got, it really kind of helped me clarify so many themes in the memoir, and it made me much more confident that this is viable, not only viable in of itself, but also commercially viable as well. So it was, and that was just an idea I had. I said, what if I do that? And then, I also got a lot of feedback because when I would put the chapters out, I didn't just put the chapter out. I put the backstory, like, this is what I was feeling. This is what I was going through. As a writer, I struggled with this. And so I wanted to give the people that were receiving the serialized chapters an idea of what's it like to walk with me as the memoir writer through this memoir, not only the story, but the writing of the story. And I'm hoping that other people felt like they were validated in their desire to write their own story. And I think that's the thing about stories, right? It connects us.
It connects us, absolutely. It's what meaningful connection really is stories that weave us together. Yeah. I'm interested in what the highs and the lows were over this period of birthing the book. I mean, it's, next week it is actually happening.
I know, I can't believe it. I know. Actually, I was like...
And I'm interested in the highs and lows.
So the highs were like, I think the highs were like when I serialized it and I got the feedback. And it was like, this
that
book
must have felt so good.
It did. And not only that, but because it wasn't just about the feedback on the writing, but it was like, this can make a difference for someone. It was that. It was like, I ended up having emails from women saying, I never told anyone, but and then they would tell me their story. And that's what I would say that was part of the highs, was knowing that by sharing my own story, and we'll get to the lows because it was some of those, and as difficult as some of it was, by sharing it, I'm giving someone else permission to share their story. And they would write to me and say, this kind of thing happened to me and I've never told anyone. And it was just so, I don't know, significant for me to know that through my story, someone else has the courage to tell their own story.
You know what? I actually think it's more than that too, because I think not only does the shaman's wife give women the permission to tell their own story, it also helps people make sense of their own story.
Yeah, it's
And
a good
that's
way of
why
putting
I
it.
think this book is so powerful. Yeah, I think it really does, because the way that you've written the book and interwoven with your story, your wisdom and insight and all of the things that every learned and lived experience you've ever had have brought you to where you are, and so all of that insight is in this book. And I think it does. I think it absolutely gives women a way of making sense of their own
Mm-hmm.
story.
And part of the highs, I think, also was I decided to kind of experiment a little with it once I got into it. So I would intersperse what I call reflective chapters, particularly because it was around shamanism, and a lot of people really don't understand what shamanism is. They think they understand, but they don't really.
Right.
And so,
True.
I would do my story, and then I would take a chapter and kind of pause and kind of talk a little bit about what were some of the shamanic concepts that were behind it that were affecting, how I was living at the time, and reflecting, on my own experience of going through that. So it was like pulling myself out of the story to reflect on it and then jumping back into the story. So there are chapters that are like that are interspersed. So it wasn't just story, 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 story. It was story, story, reflect, story, story, reflect, or something like that. And I think those chapters where I'm reflecting, I think, are some of the more powerful ones, because I also am inviting the reader to reflect on their own story, even though it might be different than mine. And of course, I'm doing it through some of the shamanic principles. But those principles you can apply those to contemporary life. Just because they're ancient principles or traditions, they're universal, and they actually really do apply to our life. So that was another part of like the highs, I would say, just that process and my own reflection and my own processing of my own story. Like writing it had me reprocess everything. So it also goes to the lows, because I also,
I was just going to say, I suspect that could be part of the low.
Yeah, because that's why I was like, my writing mentor said, "You're emotionally distant." I said, "Oh yeah, I am." I don't want to. I don't want to feel
a really
that
good reason
stuff.
for that.
And she said to me, she said, "No, if you're going to write this, you have to feel all the feels." And and some of it. And so I will share that there were two extremely difficult chapters that I had to write, and I didn't write all the chapters. I wrote like chapter 15, and then I wrote chapter 20 or something. But I was staying away from these two chapters, and I was like, "Oh, I gotta get there." And what I did was, and I would encourage anybody who has a story that maybe some part of it is painful. I went away to a retreat center in Portugal. A friend of mine runs it near Lisbon. And I had called her and I said, I have these two chapters and it's really difficult. And I need someone to take care of me. I need someone to feed me. I'm not going to be able to cook. All I'm going to do is I'm going to immerse myself in this experience, and I'm going to have to walk through that hellish experience and in order to write it. And she's like, "Well, just come." And so I spent 4 days up there. I remember it was the Easter weekend. And she let me bring my dog,
I remember
Sophie.
you going away.
Yeah. And she let me bring Sophie because, she's my like emotional support animal kind of thing. And
Right.
and I wrote them. And when I finished writing the really difficult one, I called her and she came to my room and I said, I'm going to read this out loud. I need a witness and I'm going to break down as I read it. And she was like the perfect person to do it with. And so I read
Yeah.
it, and then she just held space for me, and it was really cathartic to say it out loud, not just write it, but to actually read it out loud. What happened? Um, and so for anybody who's writing anything that, especially if there's any trauma, I encourage you to find a place where you
Mm-hmm.
feel safe and
Mm-hmm.
nurtured and find a witness, because it's kind of like a
Find a
release.
witness.
Yeah, you release it and like it
That was
doesn't
going to
have
be
it.
my next question. Is right. I was literally just going to ask you, what did that release for you?
I felt like I was unburdening. Like I've been carrying this burden, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like I could put this
Mm-hmm.
burden down now. It's out there, and like I realized just yesterday uh, that it was like, oh my God, I have 6 or 7 days to go, and I realized that the minute that book is published, it's no longer my story. It's everybody's story. It, I don't own that story anymore. That
Uh-huh.
story is mine up till September 10. And then
That's so
September 10,
interesting.
it's everybody
Yep.
else's. And that was really like I was up on the cliffs when I realized it, because I go to the cliffs that's my meditation, my thing.
Mm.
And I was like, the story no longer belongs just to me. It belongs to the reader, it belongs to the world. And at first it was like,
How
I
do you
don't know
feel
how to,
about that?
I know, it's like, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. And then it was like, oh
Right.
no, this is really good. This is a good thing. This is really like, it felt like there was a bud and it was ready to blossom. And then September 10, it opens up and it
Mm-hmm.
blossoms. It kind of feels
Mm.
like that to me.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you actually was what that date means, September the 10th. And I get it, and I'm hearing what you're saying about this. On that day it becomes everyone's story, and of course some people you've already shared it with, you serialized it, etc. But that it feels more monumental, this publishing day, where it's universally, it belongs to everyone. And I just wonder, what does that mean for you in terms of what's next for you potentially? What does
Yeah.
September
So
the 10th next week mean?
I have a feeling I'm going to be very emotional. I've
Mm-hmm.
already told my friends here. It's like, I think I'm going to be very emotional. It's like,
I think you're
it's
right.
finally, yeah, it's finally out there, like in public. It's also, you feel
Yeah.
very vulnerable and exposed, or I do anyway, because it's like people that I know are going to read the story and go, I had no idea that was what's going on, or,
Yeah.
especially who knew me during
Yeah.
that time. So there's
Right.
there's a lot of that as well. Um,
Mm.
and then like for the future, I my brain is already on to, like, I know that the next two things, I have two more projects that I want to start probably after the first of the year, that I'm really interested in actually it's like three projects, but I have to like control myself. And so so it's like, okay, this will be out in the world, and I'll still promote it and stuff, but like now I'm on to like, okay, I'm doing this other project now and I'm going to do this other project. So it's kind of like a springboard to the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and
Yeah.
then just having people understand that through my experience I'm able to be at service in a really deep and profound way to people who come work with me here in my retreats. And so I think,
Right.
now it's like, if you read my story, you kind of know who I am and what I'm about. I don't have to convince you to come.
That's
I don't have to do anything.
that's a really interesting point. I remember when we were working with Lauren as well on your brand,
Yeah.
and and I was coaching with you around, this kind of new iteration of what you wanted your life to be there in Portugal, and your
Right.
work. And it felt like it was always a challenge, one that we actually navigated pretty well, I think, because, Lauren is the best at that kind of
Yes,
thing.
yes.
But, but she is. But I do think that what you're saying is absolutely right. Whilst we had to really dig deep to represent you and the fullness of what you bring to the women who come and spend time with you, that was a challenge, because it's almost catch 22. They need to come and experience it before they're going to understand it.
Yeah, I know it is.
That's
It's
always a
kind of
challenge for
very
someone who's
difficult.
for brand and for marketing. Right, right. Writing this book is going to change everything for you, I believe, because
Wow.
I think that this gives the full picture of who you are, and it explains everything. It explains why you do what you do
Yeah,
with the
it
women
does.
who come and work with you.
Yeah, I think it does, and it
Yeah.
gives them it's a very different framework than what most people are used to. Like the kinds of
Yeah.
retreats that most people attend, or the kinds of workshops that most people attend, or even the kinds of coaching that people engage in. It's a very
Right.
unique way. And you, of all people, you know how much I struggled with trying to articulate what I do, because I don't call
I know.
myself a coach really, and um, and so I think the experience of reading the book is one where people, I'm hoping, will say, "Oh, I get it. I understand what she brings to this kind of work." And it's, I mean, really, when I said to someone, I was like, I thought, why would anybody care my story? And they're like, okay, who does that? Who goes and lives with the shaman in Ecuador? And she's like, that is a
Hello.
unique. She's like, that's a really unique
She's
story.
hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, I know.
Who does
I was
that?
like, who does
Yeah,
that?
that's
So it was,
hilarious. I think
yeah,
that's so funny. Like, you know, there are some people out there who've written books and are really successful, who've lived a tenth of the life that you've
I
probably
know.
lived, and yet you're questioning.
I know.
Amazing. Only
That's what
you.
she said. She
I
said,
love that. I love that.
mm,
It's an amazing book. I can't wait for it to belong to everyone, because
yeah.
that was the intention when you
Yes,
wrote
that
it.
was
I
the
think that's really
intention.
important.
Yeah.
I actually um, put out a shout out for the Heads Together people, and a couple of questions came through. But to be honest, one of them we've really answered. One of the questions was, how did you deal with the intense emotion of writing the more challenging parts of the book?
Mm,
And I think we've really answered that. And I think
hmm.
what blooming brilliant advice, um, in terms of asking for what you need in terms of the support while you're going through that part of the process. Is
Yeah, I
that,
think it's
and as women,
important.
we're not always great at this.
Hmm.
And I think it's, this is not a time to have pride, and this is a time to absolutely be vulnerable and ask for what you need for the support. I think is what you're
Yeah.
saying, and what you did,
I I
which is
think that,
amazing.
I'm not sure that I really don't know if I would have been able to write the chapter the way I wrote it had I tried to do it like on my own, in my own, at my desk, without any support.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
4 days of that's all I did. I just wrote these two chapters, and then going through it, then going for a walk. Like, she has horses on her retreat at her retreat center, and then I would go out and hang out with the horses, and she has a meditation garden, and I would go out and just sit, next to the Buddha with the running water, and it
Mm.
was this kind of like in and out, in and out, in and out. And of course, she had gorgeous food, and she was there. She's a very spiritual person. um, so anybody who goes, I realized, I kind of knew it intuitively that I would need the help, but like in retrospect, I would say to anybody who is writing something like that, find a place to go where you can be nurtured, and feel like there's a safe space for you to like engage the experience again in a way that you can write about it. Honestly, write about
I
it.
I think that is incredible advice. And I think, it doesn't even have to be a retreat center. Not
It
everyone
could be
perhaps
anywhere.
is able to do that, but I think it could be anywhere. It's just about breaking free of your normal environment, isn't it? To give yourself some space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to have someone who's going to take care of you like that, having knowing that I was getting 3 meals a day and I didn't have to go grocery shopping. I didn't have to cook.
You
It
didn't
was
have to
that
think
kind of,
about that.
I didn't have to think about anything but what I was in it. I could stay in it, step
Yeah.
out and get some perspective, go back in it. So I didn't have to think about the ordinary things of the day. Um, and I really think it made a difference in how I wrote it and how I was able to not go crazy doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. So the other question that I got from a couple of people was, what advice would you get? One was, what advice would you give to someone else considering writing a memoir? And I got another person writing saying, what does Alicia have any advice for people who are really at the beginning of their writing journey? So I guess those are ish the same. Um, what would
Well,
that
I
be?
think so. I'll go to the advice for people at the beginning of their writing journey. At the beginning of your writing journey,
Mm-hmm.
all you have is doubt. Am I good enough? Does anybody care? Blah, 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 blah. I mean, the little gremlin is going to town in your head, right? And my advice is
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
writing. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing,
Mm-hmm.
and find ways to improve. So whether you take a course or
Mm-hmm.
you have a writing coach or just keep writing because when you're at the beginning of your writing journey, one of the things that you might not know is your voice, your writing voice. And so if you look at different, uh, especially memoir, I would say if you read different memoir, there are different voices. This person has this kind of voice in this
Mm-hmm.
memoir. This person has this kind of voice. And so you don't know what your voice is. I didn't know what my voice was. I was used to doing business writing. And part of working with the writing mentor was to find my voice, not to have it be like comparing myself to someone else, right? Because that's where we go. It's like, oh my God, there's such a
Yeah.
better writer. I
Right.
still do that, by the way. Oh my gosh, she writes so well. Can I write
We
that
all
well?
do that.
Right. We all do that with our stuff. But so I
Yeah.
would say just keep writing and find ways to improve yourself. Find your voice. Don't apologize for your voice. Your voice could be funny. Your voice could be irreverent. Your voice could be demure. It could be anything, but it's your voice. It's
Mm,
your voice. So
yeah.
find your voice. I would say
Absolutely.
that, and
I,
then
l- I love
just
that advice, and I'm just to that point about finding your voice. For ages, when I was starting writing on Substack the first time, there were so many writers on there that I admired,
so
and the
good.
thing is, I didn't just admire them; I wanted to be like them. So I kind of wanted to sound like them, and I wanted to write about the kind of things they were writing about because I admired them so much. And
Right.
then I realized that I was writing stuff that sounded nothing like me whatsoever. And just, it was absolutely counter to what my voice is as a writer. So I really love that. And that's a journey, isn't it? It doesn't necessarily
It is.
come like that. It's something
No,
that comes
it doesn't.
gradually. Mm,
And I think Substack is
mm,
one of those places where you have the freedom to write because like when I write on Substack, I don't write to market. Like I'm not doing marketing. I'm
right.
I'm writing something that's coming from like my heart or my experience or a
Mm,
process. And then that's where my poetry. I've been posting poetry. I've never posted my poetry anywhere. Now I started doing it on
mm,
Substack. Because I don't one, I think it's a writer's community, and I see so many
yeah.
brilliant writers, and I've learned so much from them. That's the other thing I learned from other people, but I don't have to be them, and I don't have to sound like them, and I don't have to do what
And
they
that's the
do.
lesson that I had to come to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I had to come to it too because at the beginning,
Mm,
that's where we all go. Because
mm,
especially for people who are high
yeah.
achievers, like somebody I know. Looking at you. um,
Happy.
so 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 that's what I would say. And then,
Yeah,
you know,
always wanting to get it right.
right. And there is no right, you know, I mean, there's, you know, refining your own writing, voice. And always keeping the reader in mind, like what's in it for the reader. Like, so even like when I was writing the memoir, there's, I use the word takeaway, but I don't think that's quite the right word, but it was like, what is it in this chapter that I want the reader to walk away with? You know, is it a thought? Is it a doubt? Is it a lesson? What is it? And more than anything, I wanted them to feel like they were walking with me, that they could see what I saw, that they were feeling what I felt. I wanted them in my experience, not separate. I just wanted them to be in my experience so that they could reflect and say, what about that experience also lives inside me? And what do I learn from that? So that was my goal.
And you know, Alicia, you hit that goal and some. I mean, as
Thank
someone
you.
who has read your book, that is exactly how it feels to read that book. It does feel like you're alongside you, and it absolutely invites you to reflect on your
Yeah.
own life and your own stories, like I say.
Yeah, it was an
And
invitation.
next week it is published. So I think what we'll do is thank you so much. This has been so fun, the whole project of working with you. I love working with you anyway. We've worked together in lots of different ways over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
and this has been a really special experience. I've really, really enjoyed it.
And thank you for sharing
next
your
year,
platform
so.
with me. Thank you so much for, you know,
Oh
hosting
my
it
goodness.
and playing along and just being really authentically you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I will go and put all the links that anyone could ever need into the show notes. But but actually, there is one thing that I really hope you will do, and that is go and buy this book, because this is a gift. This book is an absolute bloody gift. It is so good. You're just gonna love it, and you're gonna get, when you buy and read this book, you're gonna understand why so many people around Alicia, not just Alicia, of course she's gonna say it's good. She wrote it. But when you read it, you're gonna get it. You're gonna totally understand why other people have raved about this, have supported her, have cheerleaded this book into existence, because it's a book that had to be written. So, Alicia, thank you for coming
Thanks,
live
Joe.
today.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
to
for joining
everybody.
us.
All right. Bye.
Bye.